Hi, my name is Joseph. Welcome to Chapter 3, Part 6 of Digimon Seekers, Unit 11, Digital Missing in Action. Before we begin, I do feel like this part of Chapter 3 is allowing the readers to really start finalizing a lot of dots and details to start realizing what the current situation is in the present timeline. And the timeline that we haven't really picked up on since the end of Chapter 2, where Leon is DMIA. EG seems to be a little bit hopeless, but Logomon's reminding him to have hope that they'll rescue both Postmon and Leon, excuse me. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the first quote. I'm not going to lie, the first quote is a little bit minor, and I just liked it for personal reasons. So Saya's Digimon dock was home to a dinosaur-like Digimon called Agumon. Koski's held a lady-like Tentomon, and Yolene's held a Palmon. Palmon looked like what it was, the result of a genetic experiment between a reptile and a flower. Its feet split into several root-like tendrils, its arms were vining leaves from which sharp talons extended, and a massive flower grew out of the center of its reptilian head. So, what I enjoy about this quote, so first off, right off the bat, let's connect it to Seekers specifically. I do believe that this descriptor is coming from Yolene's perspective, or her point of view. Thus, when we get the ellipses, Palmon looked like ellipses, ... Well, it looked like what it was. That kind of, not disappointment, but kind of like accepting that Palmon, that phrase, what's that phrase? A baby's face that only a mother could love, or something along that lines. I'm not saying that Palmon's not cute, but compared to the other Digimon, I would argue that she definitely is very much unique when it comes to her appearance. And I like that Yolene's kind of pointing that out, right? But I like how at the same time, Yolene's not flat out just saying that Palmon is ugly, quote unquote. Because I don't think Palmon is ugly. Again, once you start realizing Palmon's personality, I am thinking about Digimon Adventure 1 and 2 specifically, Mimi's Palmon. She is quite bubbly and adorable, right? But again, I am being a bit biased because I am thinking about a specific Digimon. For all we know, odd Palmon act differently, right? I'm going to assume that they do. They're all their own individual. Anywho, but beyond that, my personal connection, I just like how beyond Agumon, I would argue that when it comes to popularity of Digimon, definitely Agumon's going to be up there. Patamon, Gabumon, Patamon, Gatumon, Gabumon, making sure my pronunciation is clear and concise. Or is it enunciation? You guys know what I mean. But I like how with Seekers, we're going with Tentomon and Palmon. They are popular, but again, I would argue they're not the most popular, at least from my experience when I dabble amongst like pose and things like that. I also like how Tetsumon's described as ladybug. Like, to be frank with everyone, I'm not the biggest fan of insects. And before I even saw Digimon, I knew right away that Tetsumon would be my least favorite Digimon. But after watching Adventure, again, just like with Palmon, the kind of baby's face that only a mother could love, I won't argue that Tetsumon is quote unquote ugly. But definitely, once you get familiarized with Tentomon's personality, it's easy to become friends with Tentomon. Anywho, but hopefully my explanation made sense. Continuing forward. So we've successfully mind linked in a controlled test environment, both in the lab and by not leaving the confines of the Digimon dock, Koski said, picking up the device with his Tentomon in it. Though the tests were successful, all the students had experience through their partner Digimon were the smart coders of the Digimon docks themselves, which we experienced as a heavily pixelated black and white image occupied by the hiss of static and other assorted noise, Yolene interjected. And that's a hardware problem. We need more processing power, Koski said, bristling at what he perceived to be the start of an argument. So you have yet to see the digital world with your own eyes, Professor Rujichi said to no one in particular. So I feel like there's three incidents happening with this quote, or three different lines of action, three different lines of ideas. The first one, the obvious one I would argue is, well, I think they're all kind of obvious, but anyways, sorry. The first one being, I really like how we're getting details to the lead up to mind linking as we, the audience, know it from from chapter 1. because obviously with Iggy and Leon, they were already aware of all the limitations, rules, and all the concerns that came to mind linking. I think it's called the M line. Unfortunately, I can't remember specifically the different levels that one had to be aware about before they fell into DMIA. So again, the rules were already established. At this point, though, since the professor and his group are researching and experimenting, they don't yet know the full capacity of mind linking. And I love how it's being represented here through the Digimon doc, or everyone the bricks, the Digimon bricks, essentially the digital monster from the 90s, and the revisions as well, the re-releases. Excuse me. I really like how they're connecting the mind linking to the confines of the Digimon doc. For me, I feel like that's such a cool, organic way to go from seeing through the eyes of your Digimon and their doc, and then expanding to the digital world itself. So I like the world building that's being set up here. I also like the characterization that's being put up for Koski. I would argue it seems like Koski is a little bit of a hothead, a little bit hot-tempered, and dare I say a little bit impatient. Was Yolene wanting to start an argument here? Was she just sharing information? And Koski, the way that he took it, right? If Yolene was being a little bit more assertive than she needed to be, then Koski's reaction would make sense. But if Yolene was just being neutral and sharing the data, again, Koski's reaction leans to what I was saying earlier. He's a little bit impatient and hot-headed. But I don't mean that in a negative way. I am still enjoying all these characters so far. And then the last line is the professor. He really seems to always be within his own mind. I kind of noticed this as well with the past part. I don't think I mentioned it. I do wish I had. Yeah, it seems like the professor, he seems to speak with other individuals, but at the same time, he's constantly living within his own head. So that's kind of interesting. To be frank, I don't. Well, that probably is a bad thing, right? Because you should always be in the present in order to communicate effectively. But I'm not gonna lie. Again, I am being biased. I do like the professor's character. So the way that they're portraying the professor, for me, I do enjoy it, and I look forward to what else is going to happen due to this. But the way that he states, so you still have yet to see the digital world with your own eyes. He really seems to be fixated on being able to explore the digital world. And I know I keep saying this, but I'm going to say it again. I do believe it's for positive reasons, not for anything nefarious. Nefarious. I said that correctly. Hopefully I did. But yeah, so continuing forward. So we do have quite a number of quotes compared to the past parts. But hopefully, I found them to be interesting. Hopefully, you will as well. The goal remained the same. Leave the digital dock and explore the digital world firsthand. Set their Digimon free from the Digimon dock and out into their natural habitat on the net. That meant that they would need to learn to maintain control of the partner Digimon. If a Digimon escaped or the students are otherwise careless with their charges, that would be the end of it. There were no second chances. The three of them had to prove they could handle the Digimon with the precision of a team landing a probe on a small planet. So this quote, it's really emphasizing once again how these individuals are at the forefront of digital research, right? And in fact, in this part, it's described that these individuals are cybernauts, so like astronauts, but instead of going into space, they're going into the digital space. I kind of mentioned this a little bit with Chapter 2, I believe, but for sure in Chapter 1, I've mentioned how what I like about Digimon Seekers so far is that these individuals are very much pioneers. When it came to adventure, the cast was forced into that role. So it was thrust upon them, so they were put into an adventure. When it came to the second season Adventure 2, the new digital cast with Davis, Yoli, Ken, and Davis, Yoli. Who am I missing? Davis, Yoli, Ken, and the young individual. I'm sorry, for some reason I'm drawing a blank right now. I can't recall his name, and I like him too. Excuse me. But although they were choosing to go assist the digital world, they were more like a rescue team or a force, a task force, rather than pioneers. Their goal wasn't really to explore, but to assist. In Digimon Frontier, there were a task force, right? When they went into the digital world, it was for excursions to either return an egg, to gather information. Only the original cast, Masaru's dad, Kurata, and I can't recall the Digimon's version of Tarzan. I forgot his name, unfortunately. I like him. I say that not in a mean way. But the individual who grew up with Digimon, um, with the owl Digimon. Oh my gosh, I like him too. I'm actually disappointed in myself that I'm forgetting these names. Excuse me, everyone. Maybe because it's early in the morning. I'm not going to lie. This is my second take. I had to stop in the middle of my first video. Anywho, but when it came to Frontier, the older generation, they were, I would argue, pioneers. They were researchers. But again, the main cast, they were a task force. And then and then I skipped. But did I say Frontier? I'm sorry. Digimon Savers, and then Frontier. They were also on a mission. If I recall correctly, the main character, he got a message from the digital world, essentially letting them know that he had a choice. So what point am I making right here? That when it comes to Digimon Seekers, I'm really liking how so far they're establishing that these individuals are choosing to explore the digital world. It's not something that's just being thrust upon them, or something that they're accidentally discovering, or they already know information and are doing specific objectives. No, it's literally gathering information, survey data. They're pioneers, and I really appreciate how this is the third time the story has done this. Is they've done so in chapter 1, I believe in chapter 2, maybe the start of chapter 3, and now this portion specifically where they're making connections to space travel, space exploration. And this is not the first time in this part as well. We'll get to that eventually. But yeah, so that's why I really like this quote, because I think it really emphasizes the unique nature of the story, of how these individuals, they're going into the digital world, again, not by accident, but with a pointed focus, with an objective, essentially. So continuing forward, I wonder the landscape of the digital world will even look like anything we recognize, Yolene said, half daydreaming. She could conjure an image in her brain so long as it looked like Earth or any other planets in the solar system, but she had no idea what the digital world could possibly look like. All they seen of it to date were heaps of numerical values on a screen. The digital world has its own systems, the professor said softly. I beg your pardon, Professor? All three of them turned to look at him. I hypothesize that it has something akin to our food chain, survival of the fittest. These AI creatures fight with one another to see which is stronger, The stronger survive, while the weak sometimes perish. So in the end, Professor Regency said, trolling off, letting his students fill in the gap, that it wasn't so different from Earth. It had its own ecosystem capable of sustaining life, and the top priority was to experience it for themselves. So again, I am enjoying how the professor always seems to be in his own mind, and when he shares information, it's kind of like he's thinking out loud. But I don't think he minds sharing this information whatsoever. He doesn't care that other people are hearing him thinking out loud, and he doesn't mind that he could explain it. Explain it not just for them, but also I think for himself as well, to more fully understand his own thought process. It's cool too how they're coming to realize that the digital world is not so different from the real world, and it's also expressed in this part as well, that essentially they're interconnected. It's possible that the real world, it's not that the real world is discovering the digital world. It could be the opposite. And it's already been established. When I say the opposite, I mean that the digital world is discovering the real world. And it's already been established in chapter 1, that there's a relationship, dare I say, symbiotic relationship between the real world and the digital world. They have an impact on one another. Excuse me, sorry everyone. So I like how the professor, he's thinking out loud and sharing his thought process. And he's also, I would argue, showing a lot of respect to his students. He's not explaining everything to his students because he's aware that they could make the connections for themselves. So he thinks aloud, explains it a little bit to help himself get through the thought process, I believe. But not all the way, because again, he's doing it more for himself than for the group, but he also understands the group doesn't need a full explanation because they can make those connections for themselves. I'm just really enjoying the group dynamic between these four individuals. Maybe I'm overthinking it or over reading into it, but again, I do like it. Let me make sure that's everything that I want to look at. Again, I like the natural process. So all we see in the digital world has been the Digimon dock, but also what they're seeing from the data is numerical values. They're having to transcribe that data. I just like that point of perspective. It sounds so research based. Anywho, continuing forward. Like humanity's race to the moon, Professor Regency said. The first manned rocket in the Apollo program, Apollo 1, was actually the fourth such craft, and was due to be the third manned space flight. It never flew. A fire in the cabin killed all three astronauts during a routine test. Dad, Saya said, unsure of where this morbid antidote was headed. That's a pretty dark story to just throw out there like it won't jinx us, Yulin said, furrowing her brow. Several more a combination of named and manned is what I was doing there by accident. Several more unmanned test flights launched in the interim. The next crewed flight was Apollo 7, which successfully launched into Earth orbit. Apollo 8 successfully launched and orbited the moon multiple times before returning. It was the first flight to completely leave Earth's orbit, survey the dark side of the moon, and give humanity a glimpse of Earth from afar. The crew watched Earth rise from the moon's horizon. That is where we find ourselves in our efforts to serve the digital world. So again, this further connection of how instead of going externally away from Earth, this group is going internally, not into the Earth obviously, but internally, as in the discovery of this whole new world within the digital landscape. Kind of like if one would discover a world or society within the ocean, but not as what's the word? Well, not as new, right? Because again, if it's the ocean, it's still part of our world. But the digital world, it's a different landscape altogether. Dare I say, another world. Kind of like if one wants to access the digital world, it will have its own planet. Anyone's played Starfield, right? They could travel to the digital planet. Anyways, but yeah, and I just appreciate again this connection to space flight. I had to personally look into this information about the Apollo, but I don't see why it would be inaccurate. But I will double check it for myself because I just always like to verify information to be accurate. But it is really cool how this is being connected to Digimon Seekers. And one might be wondering, well, what's the point? Right? As Saya and Yolene point out, this is quite a negative thing to be discussing when they themselves are exploring, when they themselves are pioneers. And I think the reason why the professor's doing this, or the reason why he's mentioning this story, is not to be negative, but again, it's just him thinking out loud. He's realizing that in the same way that these individuals in the past were exploring new boundaries, him and his group is doing the same thing, but just digitally. But with that being said, obviously, there are possibilities that things may go wrong. And by the end of the by the end of the part, that is going to be confirmed. Even before the end of the part, we already know, we being the audience, know that something does go wrong. The fact that in chapter 1, there's no Saya, the fact that there's no Agumon, the fact that Koski's no longer working with the professor, and so forth, right? So, yeah, foreshadowing, I suppose, right? This might be possible foreshadowing. It obviously took multiple iterations to get to the final mind linking as the audience knows it. Continuing forward, much as the Earth could not be seen from the dark side of the moon, they wished to immerse themselves in and observe the digital world over the net, where they would be unable to see what was happening in the real world. They dubbed this endeavor the Tartarus program. If Apollo represented the sun, then this was a deep dive to find Tartarus in the underworld, somewhere in the vast seas of the net. The program's success would be nothing less than humanity's arrival in the digital world, a monumental achievement to rival that of humanity's arrival on the moon. This was just the first significant step. Yulin, Saya, and Koski knew what had to be done. The three of them were about to become cybernauts in the digital world. So finally, we're giving information about Tartarus. So this is obviously Koski's namesake, the name he's going to take as his code cracker persona, Tartarus. It makes me curious, does he take his name as a way to show the professor that I'm still here, you can't get rid of me, or is it a way to tell the professor that he's still working on these past relationships? He hasn't given up on the fact that Saya is DMIA. I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but I think that's kind of where this is leading, right? Really exciting. I think that's awesome. I was not expecting this program to be called Tartarus, again, because that's Koski's name, right? So making sure, and I think again, all this exploration connections I've already discussed, and then the three of them were about to become cybernauts in the digital world. I personally, I do like this pioneering aspect that they're really going with. They being the writers. She being Saya. Saya gripped the Digimon dock tightly in her hand. See this, Agum? There's gonna be a whole new town right here. It'll be called the Dinrin District. I hope it'll be easy for you and all the other Digimon to live in. The small pixelated dinosaur on the dock screen appeared to be looking back and forth as though worry of its surroundings. You talk to that thing all the time, huh? Yolene said, turning to Saya. You mean you don't talk to Palmon? Saya shot back. Well, Yolene started. She honestly never really thought about talking to her partner Digimon. They wouldn't realize it into much later, but the mind linking they've been engaging in to this point would be considered incomplete by the current standards on account of the first version of the Digimon dock's lack of features and slow network speeds. Direct conversation with partner Digimon will have to wait for the increased processing and network performance of a future device. So this is pretty cool because essentially the second half of this quote confirms what Saya is doing. Saya does not have foresight, right? All she could do is conduct actions with the present information that she has, right? And she's making the choice to speak to her Digimon in the dock. Although she doesn't know, she's not entirely sure if Agumon can understand her, she's doing so because that's just her personality. That's just the kind of individual that she is. And we're going to see her rationale shortly. But the second half of it essentially is confirming that despite this early phases of the mind linking, that indeed, if they were allowed to use the current iteration of mind linking, that they would be having conversations. It's true. Saya was correct in talking to Agumon. So I just really like that because essentially one could argue that Saya is just being childish, being silly, but the story confirms that childlike nature, well, there was some merit to be doing that. It was helpful. And what I also like about this passage is the way that Poyoli is not talking to Palmon. I am curious about Koski. I think he probably is speaking to Tentomon, but more than likely he is being encouraged by Saya. You probably see Saya doing it herself at home, so he follows suit. But poor Palmon, right? Just a straight up neutral partner for working with Yolene. But I am hopeful that Yolene will start communicating with her partner when she realizes that there's a connection to be had. And from the brief description that we have with Yolene and Ryodomon, I would argue that they do have conversations with one another. But yeah, making sure that's everything that I want to. Yep, that's everything. So continuing forward. Saya was the first among them to recognize Digimon communication as an important feature, whether she realized it at this moment or not. I mean, we talk to dogs and cats all the time, and sometimes it feels like they understand us, right? Saya went on to draw the same connection between people and Digimon. Even if the little critters couldn't speak themselves, perhaps they could begin to understand humans and human language. Koska's software tools, which granted humans forcible control over Digimon through software commands, were the only way to communicate with Digimon at the time. If Digimon could somehow understand natural language, though, no one would need specialized knowledge of the software to communicate with these AI beings. Yeah, that would be pretty handy, Yolene admitted. So I think it's pretty cool how the story takes the time to explore Saya's point of view, and I don't think that's an accident. What I mean by that is, I think oftentimes as Digimon fans, we feel like if Digimon were real, how would we treat them as pets or as individuals? And I think at this step, because we must forget, as the story like to tell us at the start, Digimon are alive, or more technically, they're sapient. They're aware of themselves and their surroundings. So at this first stage, the fact that one could argue, well, Saya is treating Digimon like they're subservient, like they're lesser than. I would argue that it's not what Saya's doing. She's attempting to connect with them at an emotional level, and she views them as pet-like, dog-like at first, but because that's the analogy that she could utilize, right? And it's true. One has any pets, when you speak with them, even when they're not mammals, like for reptilians, I've seen some videos where it looks like the turtles or the snakes or lizards really understand what their owners are saying or doing, right? There is some connection. And as the research continues following in, of course, that's when their attitude will continue to change. What I mean by that is Saya will go, okay, I shouldn't treat Agumon as just a dog, I should treat Agumon as a friend. Or maybe first as an accomplice and then eventually a friend, right? So I just think it's really cool. and really logical, and maybe a little bit meta, kind of going into the Digimon community a little bit. Or again, maybe I'm just looking too much into it. But yeah, and then I also like how essentially right now that they're using tools to communicate with the Digimon. But when we get with EG's uh, point in the timeline, those tools are not really needed, right? All that's needed is just that linker strap because that's what the Digimon is leaving, but they don't need to use anything special to communicate. Again, I like that world building aspect, the advancement of this technology. So continuing forward, in fact, sometimes I think I can really hear Agumon's voice. Saya blurted out. You can hear Agumon talking to you? Yeah, when we're mind linked. I mean, I'm pretty sure someone's talking to me anyway, so our partner Digimon might be able to talk to us when we're inside the Digicore. But you never reported that. You have to keep it a secret. And they think I'm hearing things, it might kick me off the project, Saya pleaded. That much was true. They could always push her off in favor of an alternate candidate. It didn't help that she'd been the slowest of them to adapt to mind linking. She was also the only one who vomited after the only one who would vomit after each session, which made it all the more surprising that by all the available metrics, she shared the strongest bond with her partner Digimon. Everyone expected that her mind link with Agumon would produce the clearest footage of the digital world to date. So I do find this to be quite interesting because one would argue that it would have been Koski maybe to get the most data because as it's described, he's the most professor-like as in his behavior. But we're seeing that I would argue that between the three, Yolene, Koski, and Saya is the most emotional. Yolene seems to be ethos or authority. Koski seems to be logos or reasoning. And Saya would be pathos or emotion. And it's seeming like one aspect of connecting with Digimon would be the technical side or the rational, reasoning side. But in order to make connections with the Digimon, you also have to keep in mind the emotional point of view. So I'm looking forward to if the story is going to do anything with this. It's specifically highlighting that Saya has the least technical connection, but despite that, she has the most emotional connection, the most psychological / emotional connection. Because just saying emotional by itself sounds a little bit negative. But hopefully that makes sense. Essentially, why is Saya having such a strong connection with Agumon? It's because Saya is treating Agumon as an individual, or at least getting to that point. But what I also like is the fact that she's withholding information. She thinks she's hearing Agumon's voice, but she's not sure. That is quite concerning. What they're doing again is the akin of going to a new world. I guess I'll use Starfield as an example. Minor spoilers for Starfield. Nothing for the main story, but the new enemy, one of the new enemies, Terramorphs. Sorry, I'm throwing something away. Terramorphs, for example, one of their abilities is that they're able to project psychological illusions and auditory illusions as well. What if we were to explore another planet? So let's pretend Mars, and we discovered another race, and they're apprehensive of us, and that's what they're doing. They're making us hear things in order to throw us off. It's a defensive mechanism. For Sash, she doesn't know if what she's hearing is a good or a bad thing. She's believing it to be a good thing, and it is. Right? I don't think Agumon's being like, "Oh, I'm gonna get you. Get out of here. You don't belong here. You're too old." No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Stupid Stephen King It reference, the the '90s movie. Anywho, but yeah. So the fact that she's hiding that information, it can be a little bit concerning because well, they need to be clear with one another, but she's withholding it because she obviously has a vested interest in continuing this experimentation and she wants to be a part of it. She wants to be a part of it not just for glory, but I think it's because she's getting that emotional connection with Agumon. It's starting to become deepened. But yeah, moving forward, connecting with Digimon is incredible and incredibly dangerous. Yeah, like encountering an extraterrestrial. The discovery of Digimon wasn't like the discovery of a new species, really. If anything, Yoling figured it was likely that humans were operating on the incorrect assumption that Digimon intelligence and society were below those of humans. She gave voice to her concern. We think we discovered the digital world, but what if we're the ones what if we're the ones who've been discovered? All the more reason for us to continue our studies. The network has already caused our worlds to collide, Saya said, acknowledging Yolene's question. So, as fans, I would argue that most of us have a positive view, a positive perspective of Digimon and the digital world. And the anime does sometimes explore different perspectives, right? Like when Digimon start infiltrating the real world and how the news talks about them. In fact, Adventure Tribe, well, that's one of the plot points, is how people perceive Digimon. I'm not going to lie, the way that Digimon are being described right here in the digital world, it's a little bit imposing, a little bit intimidating. What if, in fact, that they were the ones who did discover us, right? If anyone's ever seen Digimon Data Squad or Savers, it seems like Igusho was aware about the human world, and Igusho was not happy when the human world started interfering or intervening. What if, in this instance, uh, we don't know if it's Igusho, but let's pretend that Igusho does exist in this world of seekers, detects the real world and starts making those connections and starts making those pathways to make them connected, make them interconnected. Anyways, I know more than likely that's not going to be the fact. Probably by the end of Seekers, it's going to be a positive ending. But I'm just putting myself in the perspective of these individuals, and that is something to keep in mind, that Digimon are incredible, but they could also be a little bit dangerous. So, as the first line states, connecting with Digimon is incredible and incredibly dangerous. Two sides of one coin, right? Continuing forward, we're almost done with the quotes. We have 3 more after this. Hopefully, one is not too bored. If there's anything that you guys found interesting, please do share them, your thoughts with me in the comments. My dad thinks you're the most important member of the team, you know. Saya added with a smile, abruptly changing the subject. Me? Not Koski? Yolene said, her voice rising in surprise. Nope. He's just a younger version of my dad, and I'm his daughter, so it's hard to separate me from that label. But you make this feel more like an official operation, like a company, Saz said to a blank stare and silence from Yolene. Here, I'll give you an example. Say we make a mistake and start heading down the wrong path in our research. You're basically the only one who could stop us. At least that's what I think. Wait, what? What are you talking about? I know it's a lot. And then it cuts off right here. Koski returns with drinks. I think this is foreshadowing. I think this is really important detail in the story to give us a hint that so by the time the story ends, we know that these 3 individuals are going to commence the Operation Tartarus, and what possibly is going to happen is that maybe the professor and Koski, they encourage everyone to keep going forward when there was a point when they should have turned around, and maybe Yolene is going to highlight that, but Saya, in her effort to kind of be the middle person to please both Koski, the professor slash her dad, and Yolene, maybe she's not going to listen to Yolene, but kind of take the middle ground and go, maybe we could go a little bit further instead of all the way, and then something bad is going to happen. I say this because the way that Saya says that if we make a mistake or start heading down the wrong path, you're basically the only one who could stop us. At least that's what I think. And I think when Yolene asks, what are you talking about? And Saya says, I know it's a lot. I think she was going to say it's a lot of responsibility or a big burden. But essentially, Yolene is maybe the moral authority, the moral center of the group. Again, I'm going to go back to how Koski is the logos or the reasoning. Yolene is the emotional or pathos. And then Saya is the emotion pathos. And then Yolene will be ethos or the authority. So when I say moral center, I mean as in keeping in mind being objective, essentially, is what I'm saying. But the fact that it gets cut off and Yolene's not able to explain herself, it wouldn't surprise me if we'll come back to this passage in the future. I kind of have to screw up. Excuse me. Let's stay just a little longer, Saya said. I'm good either way. It's been a minute since I got to just stand around and zone out, Koski noncommittally concurred. I'll be in the car then, Yolene said, resolutely walking away. She got in, fired up the engine, and turned on the heat. She watched Saya and Cusco huddled together, looking up at the clear night sky, where the moon was the only thing returning their gaze. She rested her hands on the steering wheel and watched them through the windshield. Why they had to make such a display of everything. Slightly irritated at the showy affection, she put out her phone and took a sneaky photo of the 2 lovebirds. Excuse me, that was a hiccup, or the start of a hiccup. Sorry. Excuse me. So what I like about this passage is just the characterization that they do for Yolene. I would argue it wouldn't surprise me if in the present timeline that Yolene was single. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a positive way. It seems like Yolene knows what she wants and she keeps her career and her academics at the forefront because she knows that that's going to be the route to what she's looking for in life. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but you guys know what I mean, right? If she was still single, it wouldn't surprise me because again, she seems like the individual who is comfortable being alone, is comfortable with being with her own self. But despite that, though, she's also not bitter. Or one could argue, well, Joseph, what are you talking about? She's all a little bit upset at the showy affection, the display of affection. But she takes a picture, right? Yolene takes a picture. I think the reason why she's a little bit upset about the display of affection is stemming from a little bit of jealousy. I think if Yolene could have that, she would. But at the same time, Yolene doesn't reject it completely because she's happy for them. She's emotionally intelligent and emotionally mature enough to acknowledge, yes, I might be a little bit jealous. I wish I could have this for myself. But I don't mind if I don't have it. And what a pretty little Kodak moment this is coming out to be. Let me just take a picture of it and maybe share this with them in the future. They don't realize how adorable they look, right? I'm thinking from Yolene's perspective. I just like the characterization this does for her. She seems to be a very objective individual, but not stubborn. There's some leeway to be had if one is able to explain themselves. So actually, let me go back and make sure that's everything. Okay, actually, there's only one more quote after this. Oh, the last one was just an extra page in case I did find anything. Excuse me. So now the last quote. Rizenji Electronics' Tartarus program was at last ready for its debut in Test Chamber 4. On Professor Rizenji's orders, the attack team consisting of Yolene, Koski, and Saya were to simultaneously mind link to their Digimon. Yolene was the captain, Koski was the engineer and navigator, and Saya the one-woman survey team. They boarded a digital observation vessel they dubbed the Tartarus probe and prepared to begin the first direct observation of the digital world through their partner Digimon Palmon, Tentomon, and Agumon. It was an abject failure. So the way that it ends, I'm not gonna lie, it gives me the chills a little bit. I'm really looking forward to the next part. It's looking like maybe the next part will be the last one set in the past, and then with part 8, we'll finally get back to the present. Or it'll be even cooler, maybe part 7 in the midway we'll get a page break and we'll go back to the present timeline. So there was something I wanted to discuss. Let me go back to the quote. Test chamber 4. That test chamber keeps getting repeated. I'm pretty sure it was mentioned in chapter 2 and also mentioned in chapter 1. Really intriguing to see what kind of experiments is going on in test chamber 4 and if there's any significance to that. Another thing that so what I find so interesting as well in the previous part when it was mentioned that the individuals already had their partner Digimon, I really believe that they had their I think I did talk about this at the beginning already, that they had their Duromon, Ryudomon, and then excuse me everyone, sorry that was a hiccup. And then Saya with their regular Agumon instead of Black Agumon. As I said, I had to record this twice just in case I didn't explain this or what I find interesting is the fact that Saya doesn't have her Black Agumon yet. So is something going to happen where Agumon transforms into Black Agumon? And then again, the fact that Yolene and Koski don't have Ryori and Duromon, I think they're going to get it through the professor. But they're not working with the professor anymore. Or rather, sorry, Yolene obviously is because in chapter 2, she went to go visit and speak with the professor. We don't know for what reason, but through Iji's point of view, we saw that there was a interaction going on there. But with Koski, he's obviously seems to be disconnected from everyone else. But yet again, he has Doromon. So is he going to steal Doromon maybe? Is the professor going to give these two individuals their Digimon and then something happens? And I'm really looking forward to the discovery of Agumon and Black Agumon, what happened to Saya. And I'm hopeful that it's going to be a mystery. When the answer is revealed, it'll be a satisfying answer. But that's everything I want to discuss from this part. My question for everyone is, are you a little bit tired of this past timeline? Or rather, again, I don't want to call it flashbacks just because we didn't start in the middle of the story and then go back. The beginning of this part specifically began in the past. But I personally, although I did begin quite fine with it, at this point I am quite eager to get back to the present timeline. But with that being said, I'm not hating this format that Bandai Namco is doing. The information that's being provided for us, I think, is doing such a great job for allowing for speculation and theory crafting. And so, although I am eager to push forward, and that might just be me being impatient. But to be frank with everyone again, I'm not too concerned about how long we spent in the past, mostly because I love how they did this at the start of chapter 3. I think I would have hated this a lot more, and they went it started flashbacks in the middle of chapter 3. I won't be specific, but there's a recent game release where it's a big one as well. It just released where the story all of a sudden just goes back to the past, and I'm just really rarely a fan about that. I much prefer it more when it begins in the past and then it shifts over. Anyways, but yeah. So, what are your perspectives on that? Are you already fed up with it? Are you eager to get back to the present? As always, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. I hope you have a prodigious day and take care, everyone.